were you able to watch the movie and everything?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just was
Okay.
making sure that's what we were doing.
I was grateful that this class was really front loaded. I couldn't believe it.
Yes.
Gotten easier and easier. Okay, so the first question, should we just read them and then answer them?
Yeah.
What doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? And why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart to be passionate and persistent? Okay, so I'll go ahead and go first on this one, and then we can just switch off if that's okay.
Okay.
So to me, it's when you have an understanding of doctrine, then you can have a testimony of that doctrine, and then you are compelled to act on that doctrine, no matter what the action requires. And Wilbur, to me, had this really innate sense of right and wrong, and he could see the present day issues regarding slave trade and what it could do in the future, and how it could be the downfall of mankind if it continued. The thing I loved about him is he was educated and he was involved and he knew what was going on in his life and in his community and in the country and the world. And he really did have the spirit with him. To me, he had religion in the beginning of his life, and then he fell away from it, and then he came back. And so that really reminded me of the scriptures in Proverbs 22:6, when it said, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so it didn't mention a lot about his family, his parents or anything, but he must have had some good parents to raise him like that. And then as far as bringing in our class material, Julie B. Beck, of course, expressed the importance of teaching the doctrine to our children and how effective that can be through generations when we are seriously teaching our children about the doctrine of the church. And another thought I had was the proclamation is written to the world. It's not just written to members of our church. And so this doctrine is for the entire world to hear and to see and to know where we stand. And we have to be good examples of what our church stands for. My last thought is, it was a quote from Julie B. Beck. Parents, teachers, and leaders, live in your homes, in your families, in your marriages, so that youth will develop hope for eternal life from watching you. Live and teach with so much clarity that what you teach will cut through all the noise youth are hearing, and so that it will pierce their hearts and touch them. And I feel like someone in Wilbur's life did this for him.
Yeah. I kind of took a different aspect of it.
Okay.
When I first read the question, I had just watched the film and I was thinking about kind of how he was haunted a little bit, where they were kind of doing a little bit of the flashback type thing, where with the dreams and how it was something that it was bothering him, and you could obviously see that. So I kind of took more of that aspect of it with it, because that's a lot of what started him to turn towards religion again in his life, and really started to kind of help get him moving a little bit more with it. Especially like with the end of the film and him and his group coming up and being able to, overcome it. And I think it was just kind of, you could see that passion from the beginning. You could see that he was driven from the beginning of the film with it. And I think that's how we need to be in our lives, is we need to really be driven in what we're doing and not doing it just because we're supposed to do it, or just following the actions, and because there are points in the film where I felt like some of the things they were doing just because they kind of knew that it would help out in one way or the other, but they didn't really care as much. And it was the lack of caring that kind of slowed them down.
Yeah. True.
And I'm looking at my notes here. And like when we're advocating and stuff, we have to think about the fact that, we're not just building families, but we're helping save lives in some ways. You know, especially with comparing it to this, is how many lives were they saving by stopping slavery, you know? And I think, you know, one of the big things we're facing now is abortions. You know, how many lives could we be saving in that aspect of what we're advocating against? And it doesn't just affect us every day, but it affects the lives of people around us, and it affects the lives coming into this world.
I like that angle. I think it always takes something in our life to kind of kick us into action a little bit. And I know it does for me anyway, for sure. All right. Any other thoughts on that question?
No.
Okay. Do you want to read the second one? You know what? Give me a second. I've got to plug my computer in or I'm going to lose it.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
How did Wilbur employ a theological approach to become a more effective advocate? Identify at least one thing in each system to be specific, and it's talking about the Bronfenbrenner thingy. How to say that is beyond me most of the time. So do you want me to start with explaining it too?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I did is I broke it up into each system.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started with the individual, and I was looking at Wilbur himself and just the fact that he wanted to learn about how the slavery kind of happened and what happened to the slaves individually. He took it upon himself to be able to do that. And then with the microsystem, you know, it was the stories he was hearing about the people and how it was affecting not just one person, but it was affecting the families and the communities. You know, it wasn't just one person being taken out. They were taking out hundreds of people at a time, and a bunch of different families and different things were being affected because of it. And then there was also like his group that was helping him search the information and passing the information along and things like that too. And then with the mesosystem, it's kind of just expanding that a little bit more. And the part I thought about in the movie was where they had the people riding on the boat and come up to like the ship where they kept the slaves, and he explained about it and stuff, and more of taking that and explaining it to other people so that it affected them, but in an indirect way. And then with the exosystem, that's when I started to think about like the parliament and government type of thing and how they were fighting with the act. And then the microsystem is kind of the beliefs behind the members that were fighting and why they felt the way they did. And then the chronosystem is just the time that it took to get through everything, because there was a lot of lives that were still lost during that time. And so every minute they were fighting affected people's lives.
Okay, that's good. I also did the same kind of thing. I broke it up into Wilbur himself, and again, his understanding of what was going on and his passion to help it, and all the knowledge he had. I love that he was a learned man, and he was a learned man, but he was also a commoner, so I liked that. The microsystem, again, he had to have had a good family life or someone in his life that taught him. In his community, he had John, the monk, who was his mentor throughout his life, a mentor and supporter. And he always seemed to go back to him and ask him questions and talk with him. In the microsystem, he understood what was involved in policymaking in his community, and not just for slave trade, but for many different things like prison and education and healthcare. He surrounded himself with like-minded friends and advocates to accomplish his change. He had some really great friends that eventually took positions like Pitt, who took the position of prime minister, who was able to help him in the end. And I like that he eventually established a home of his own and a family of his own. So, and then in the mesosystem, again, that's really kind of an extension of what we just talked about, but he kept his peers and his friends close to him. They were good friends on a professional level and also on a personal level, and I liked that, and I think that helped create a lot of opportunity to advocate. He was always listening to public speeches and listening to other people in his community, and I mean, they didn't have media, but he was always reading and learning and wanting to be a part of his community. As far as the exosystem goes, obviously he sat on the parliament and learned. Sorry, I got a new puppy. Having a fit over here. And he was listening and learning how to speak out and gaining confidences and enemies in the parliament. And again, he worked on other things except for just the slave trade. He worked for healthcare and education and better prisons and that kind of stuff. In the macro system, his background, I think, was so strong in the micro and meso systems that he was able to make such a difference in the macro system. So in religion, he was evangelical, aligned with the Church of England. And again, John, the monk, was such a good friend. And so his religious understanding was really good. And he used that understanding for to further his cause and to know what God wanted him to do. I think he realized in the religious sense that he was kind of, I think he eventually realized he was foreordained to do this. That he was born at this time to help abolish slave trade, which is kind of cool. Obviously, he was concerned about ethnicity and treating all people as equal, and freedom was an important part of his message, of course. And he also understood the economics behind slave trade in Britain or the British Empire, and the money that it brought, and the hardship of economics that country would have when they got rid of slave trade as well. So, and the chrono system, again, it was just kind of the journey through all of these other systems, but he also understood all of this on a world level as well. He was educated enough to know how it would affect how it would affect Africa, how it would affect, America, all the different countries as well. Okay.
That's good.
Anything?
Just something that I thought about is like how they geared it so that it was like stopping France from doing something that would also stop them from the slavery kind of thing. And so I think that it was also interesting how he was willing to listen to his friends and to be able to just take the advice and really run with it in a way, because that's something that didn't just affect one of the systems, but it affected quite a few different systems in the end.
Right. It was amazing the support he had all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty cool. Okay, any other thoughts on that?
I think we're good.
Okay, the next one is, how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share their research, and what evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence? So my two favorite parts of the movie, related to this question, is when he built the replica of that box and he was hiding in it, and then he came out and talked to his friend, but he actually tried to put himself in that position so he could share with others kind of what it felt like. And so others could, if they wanted to, get in the box and see what it would be like to sit in there for 3 weeks, in your own, mess and stuff. So I thought that was kind of cool. And that's research. And I also liked that you mentioned before the gathering on that ship where he brought everybody together and they had, food and, kind of a merriment going on. And then he turned it into, he shared the story of the slaves and some of the data. They started out with 600 and only 200 made it, and how they had to live and how they were chained up and that kind of stuff. And then I thought the coolest part of that part of the research, which is not, I don't know if you consider it research, but it was the smell. I think smell is such a, it brings back so many memories and everything. So I thought that was really cool how we brought in the smell so they could experience that and have to remember that, that smell. Let's see. I just remember him. I don't always remember the exact type of data he shared, but he was always sharing stuff that his group had collected when he was doing his speeches. And then from what we learned from our class, I remember learning that the policy making happens so fast, but the research is so slow, and how good it would be if we could just slow down the policy making to match the research, because a lot of times we make policies that don't down the road reflect what we really need. And I think that was happening to him. Gathering research had to have been really slow back then, and I think it was hard to get a lot of research on what he was doing. And that they have to make research and policy making work together more. And then I also thought about with Marcia Barlow, how she said you bring in a personal story and then you combine it with data, and then that's very powerful. And I think that's kind of what he did on that ship. He did the personal story and then combined it with data.
Yeah, I mentioned that in mine too about the boat and stuff. There's also like a lot of letters that were written, thank you letters, letters of information, accounts about people that had dealt with it and stuff, and a lot of that was used to gain information and research, and also spread out research to other people so that others could be informed. And then another thing that I pointed out that you didn't talk about was the signing of the petition and presenting that to the government. Yeah. Just because, they had to have a bunch of people informed about it for them to even be able to sign the petition and know what they were signing. And so I think that was a huge thing too.
Yeah, you're right. That is a really important part of that. I know I brought that into a later question, but I didn't think to put it in with the research part, but that's true. And those people had to know what they were signing, so they were getting that knowledge and research out to them as well. Anything else?
That's all that I had written down.
Okay. You can go ahead and read the next question.
How does the film portray the importance of working together as a group? What has family advocacy group work taught you? Just kind of throughout this film, you could always see them working as a group with his friends and his colleagues. And then just kind of relating a little bit of that to the group I was in and stuff. It took all of us to really be able to learn from the material, because we all had different backgrounds, we all had different perspectives, and so as we were able to share with each other, we were able to gain more insights, we were able to see things from a different point of view, and we were able to, by sharing, we were able to get a broader perspective of it, and instead of taking one person's account, you're not always going to see everything through it. And so by working as a group and being able to share, we were able to learn a lot more. And then kind of also, it doesn't take one person to change a huge thing. It takes a lot of people to be able to choose and change things that are huge throughout the world. And I don't think, Wilbur would have been able to do it by himself. He had to have his friends and his colleagues helping him out to be able to do what he did.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I kind of did that. I went along those same lines. I loved his friend, William Pitt, because I think he's kind of the one who encouraged him to keep going and gave him the venue of how to do it. You can advocate for God, but you can also, use God's policies and put them into politics. And that was so important. I loved the eclectic group of clergymen and the one woman that he brought together. And they kind of spread throughout the area and the world, and found people to help them and collected that data and research. And Wilbur, you're right, could have never done that on his own. I even liked the guy, I can't remember his name, but the Black guy who wrote the book and had that published. And I think that brought in a lot of people as well. And it brought an actual personal, what do I want to say? It brought a personal, and it was actually written down and published. It brought that to the table, which all of those white clergymen and women could have never done themselves. So that was pretty cool. Again, I loved John, the monk, who was with him the entire way and had great advice and stuff. Another part of the group that I loved was his cousin and the cousin's wife, who schemed to try to set him up with his wife, with his future wife. I thought that was pretty cool. And she even, she's the one who really helped him physically as well as emotionally and mentally, but she kind of helped keep him healthy so that he could keep going. So she was also a favorite part of the group for me. And I said the same thing, that he could have never done it on his own. It took everybody's life experience and expertise to be brought to the table so they could pass that bill. The only other thing I thought about that you didn't mention about being in the group was in the book, The Sacred Duty. That would have been so scary for me to go over there by myself and try to advocate like that. But when he got over there, and he was kind of professional at this, he knew what he was doing. But even when he got over there, there was a giant group who agreed with him that he didn't even know from all over the world. And they all helped him and supported him even through the night and making papers and copies and distributing them and gathering stuff. And I just thought, you just can't do it alone. But if you just make that first step out there, I think we'd all be surprised at how many people would rally around us, and that we could rally around others with the same idea to change something. It would. I think that's kind of cool. You can't do it alone. You have to have a group to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't even think about that book, which I probably should have, but I didn't.
Well, now you can write it down.
Yeah.
Oh, this is where I also shared that they worked together to get that 390,000 name petition. They would have never been able to do that on its own, but together they were able to get that done. So, all right. Let's see, your turn or my turn on the next question?
I think it's your turn.
Okay. What parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in Alma 46? What is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? And how can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices? Well, he is quite a bit like Captain Moroni. I have, first of all, love of God, love of country, love of freedom, and love of all mankind, which he exemplified in all that he did. Wilbur was strong-willed, dedicated to the cause, willing to give his own life if that's what it took. He had a close relationship with God. He understood what God wanted him to do, just like Moroni did. He was courageous and brave enough to defend the truth even against all odds. And he used both the political arena and the religious arena, like to bring people to the truth, just like Moroni did, because he used both religion and politics as well. And then I put in some scriptures that I just liked from Alma 46, but mainly they talk about people get evil really quickly, and I think sometimes stuff like this slave trade, I think it probably hit them really quickly all of a sudden. Just like I think same-sex marriage is, just it kind of sneaks up on you a little bit. Some of these things, or abortions, or whatever it is you're advocating against. Sometimes it can really sneak up on you. But so evil happens quickly, and then I just put. Moroni prayed a lot, and it seemed like Wilbur also prayed a lot, which I love that about him. And then, of course, Wilbur was all about protecting the family and human rights. I also love that Wilbur didn't join the revolution. He didn't like the idea of the revolution, and he understood the ramifications that would have if they did a revolution, and that he actually said, I pledge my allegiance to the king and country. So I liked that, and that reminded me of, it's Article of Faith 12, right? That you're subject to kings, presidents, magistrates, and so forth. So I like that about him, that he put his king and country first, and he did things legally. When it asks about the professional advocate, what is a Christian and professional family advocate? I think when you have the morals of Christianity and you advocate in a political arena, that kind of combines those two to me. And how can we do it? I think one of my favorite quotes from the movie was from John the monk. God does his work with a quiet drizzle. And I think that we have to remember that we're not going to just jump right in and make a giant change. It takes a lot of effort. And I think we have to be kind and consistent. We have to be knowledgeable, prayerful, firm and brave, persistent, and get a group like Wilbur had to surround us, or be a part of that group so that you have that support.
I talked a lot about what you talked about too, so I'm trying to pick out the stuff that you didn't talk about. So there's a part where it kind of talks about Moroni going through kind of a hard time before chapter 46, and so I kind of mentioned a little bit about how, like, Moroni wasn't perfect. He wasn't always, grand and stuff, and Wilbur was kind of the same way, where there were moments where he kind of got down in the dump a little bit, and he didn't quite know what to do in moments, but that didn't stop him from fighting. And then I kind of talked a little bit about what you talked about as well with it, and then went on and was like, well, with us and when we're fighting and stuff, we're gonna have times where we're not gonna be on top. We're gonna have times where we feel like what we're doing isn't affecting anything, or where we're taking it at the point isn't really doing any good, but we can't give up, because when we give up, nothing's gonna happen, nothing's gonna change. And so I took a little bit more of that perspective with it, and how we need to rely on the Lord in our lives to help us get through the tough times. And we don't necessarily have to be screaming from the rooftops that we're LDS, or that we believe in in the Lord or anything like that, but that it's something that we don't need to hide at the same time, because the Lord is what gets us through so much of those hard times, you know, kind of like how he relied on his friend John and the monk and stuff, and how he relied on his friends to help him get through those rough times a little bit more. You know, it seemed like during the bad times is when he was going to that church and things, and trying to really figure out where's my next step. And we have to be a lot like that too, and realize, you know, we're not going to be able to do it on our own. And when there may not be people around us, the Lord is still with us.
That's a really good point. I like that. That's very true. That's the same, the guy that was in that book relied heavily on the Lord as well. I mean, he was constantly praying, and as soon as he would pray, you know, Heavenly Father would send him somebody to help him. So you're right. That's a great point. Okay, you're up.
So Marcia Barlow spoke a persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas? How so? I brought up the boat again with this part, kind of telling his story and everything like that, and explain that once again, because, you know, like we've stated before, like he related it to the smell. He showed him the chains. He took this story and made it personal to every single one of them by giving them a little bit of an experience with it, you know. And then kind of like what you were talking about with the box, I didn't mention it in here, but that totally applies to it too. You know, it takes this story and it makes it applicable to every single person.
Okay. I said the exact same thing. That boat was important. Let's see. Marcia also talks about kind of taking what you're saying and reframing it, and that's kind of how they ended up winning and getting this passed. Was they'd come every year and argued the same point over and over again, and as soon as they reframed it into a different point, I mean, it was a little bit of cheating, but as soon as they reframed it, they were able to pass it and to have people kind of understand it a little bit better. The other thing is he seemed to use humor a lot to me, which kind of lightened the mood when you're in a situation like that. So I kind of like that about him, where he lightened the mood with those who opposed him. He seemed to be always precise and didn't ramble on and on and on. He was exact and short and precise. Now, the question I had is, did he keep religion out of it? I don't think he did. Didn't he bring religion into it?
I think there might have been parts where he did, but I'd have to go back to through the movie and look again to be sure.
Yeah, because I know Marcia said keep religion out of it, but I think at this time religion was so intertwined in their lives. I think that he brought religion into it, but I do like what Marcia said, where nowadays if you bring religion into it, it kind of messes you up. I think that was everything else I had as well. Okay, so the next question, you know, I didn't quite understand where she was going with this, but it says, what role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight for the slave trade? And did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not? So I'm not really quite sure how to answer this, but the government, of course, made the policy and fought mainly for the economic side of it. And I know that these slaves were now running their fishing harbors and keeping a lot of their economics growing and making profit, and the slaves kept them as the top power in the world, and they were really worried about losing that power, I think, to France, right? And so they didn't want to let go of the slave trade for that reason, because of that power and money. And then obviously the slaves were helping out with everybody's mundane tasks as well, the family's mundane tasks, personal in their personal homes and responsibilities. Um, as far as religion was involved, it seemed as though religion was against it because it was, inhumane treating of humankind, of other people. So I didn't think that they were involved. Did I see their political system being pro-family? Well, I did, I guess, because when you fight for, I don't know, I guess I just think when you fight for economic power and you want people to come in and help you run your family and your household and do all those chores for you or whatever, I think you're thinking of the family. I don't know, I wasn't quite sure how to answer that one. But that's what I have on that.
Yeah. So I started talking about the religion part of it. And I talked about like with Wilbur and his religion and stuff like that's the main reason why he was fighting against the slave trade and stuff is because of how wrong it was and how much he saw that. That also I also kind of added in about like John's experience with it. Before John was or went into the whole being a monk and leading the church and stuff, he had personal experiences with the slave trade and that's what drove John a lot to what he was doing. And so I talked a little bit about how like the main reason or like religiously definitely had a huge part in in the fight against the slave trade. And then you also saw him like going and praying like in the yard where he was kind of away from people and stuff. And I added a little bit about that in there too with it as well. And then I went and talked more about like the government and policy where, the government is what makes the policy. And they were constantly fighting the government to be able to get the slave trade abolished. And so obviously the government and the policies were against or were the reason why they had to have the fight in the first place kind of thing. And so as far as like the political system being pro-family, I said no because of the fact that that's the system they were fighting was the political system. And it seemed like those that were within the political system, something that I did pick out from the movie is the sugar. They were making the sugar. The slaves were what made the sugar and stuff, and they cared more about getting their sugar and having their sugar for their tea than they did about the people that risked their lives to be able to produce that sugar.
So I guess they were pro-family as long as it was their pro-family. They didn't look at the other through, for the world. That's a good point. That's a good point. Okay, anything else?
That's all I had for that one.
Okay, you're up then.
Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well? How did you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of? I went and mentioned like how he made mistakes, but he held the same purpose the whole entire time. And I talked a little bit about how we may not be perfect, but it's the purpose of it's our overall purpose that really shows us who we are. When we think about people that are famous and stuff, we don't necessarily think about their mistakes. We think about what they did to better the country and to put us where we are today. And so, while yeah, we make mistakes and stuff, it's that concentration and the consecration that we have towards the Lord and towards what we're doing to be able to really help us through the fight and to help us better freedom and better families throughout the world and stuff. And so I think that he did, maybe not necessarily towards the straight path the whole entire time, because we're not perfect, but he did the best he could.
Okay, that's good. That talk we had just kind of read, so it was kind of fresh in my mind, and I just kind of went through that talk and picked out the things from that talk, and where I felt Wilbur also did consecrate whatever he consecrated to his life. So this is what I kind of came up. So Elder Christofferson said that life gives us time and agency, and Wilbur obviously used his time and agency for the good of mankind and families of all race and religion. I put he was submissive to the will of the Lord, and he desired correction and accepted all that God required of him, even though he, made some mistakes along the way, which we all do. He seemed like a happy guy to me. So he kind of carried his burden. I thought he carried his burden really well, especially when he got married and had a wife and a family. I think that really helped him. And I feel like Heavenly Father really blessed him with that to keep him going. He went, I think it was like 15 years, and then he got married and had a family, and it allowed him to keep going. So I think that was a blessing of consecrating so much of his life to the will of the Lord. And I like that he was happy. This was his passion because he actually had a testimony and a strong belief. And so it was not easy, but it was easy to fight for this because he believed it so strongly. He understood and knew what Heavenly Father wanted and needed him to do. And again, he felt this was his calling on the earth. He consecrated his life, his health, his family supported him, his time, his energy, and his money. He never gave up in this life. And once he overcame that first battle and it got past, he moved on to help in other areas like healthcare and prison and education. So he continued to consecrate his time. And he respected his own life as a temple and the lives of others as a temple. And that was his main reason in stopping, slave trade, is because he respected everybody's life and body as a gift and a blessing from God. Okay, any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy? So I put down here, and I'm not going to share all of these with you, but I put down a lot of my favorite quotes from the movie, but I'll share a couple with you. I liked towards the end, I think it was the Prime Minister, William Pitt, who said this. He said, the difference between appease and surrender is time. And that really hit me. I thought, it takes a long time and a lot of effort to maybe make a change like this. But the other side, the evil side, is also waiting patiently for us to surrender too. And I think of same-sex marriage, how it was 20 years ago and how it is now. They've been waiting and waiting and appeasing, and now all of a sudden the government is starting to surrender and policies are changing. And you see that with abortion and pornography. I mean, you see that with every threat to the family. So we have to put in our time as well to fight for the good, because the evil side is also putting in their time. The other, one of my other favorite quotes was, in fact, I entitled my talk, Noblesse oblige. It was toward the end, and it means nobility obliges me to recognize the virtue of an exceptional commoner. So Wilbur was just a regular guy. He didn't hold a high position anywhere. He was He was just a regular guy from a regular background, and he was able to make a big difference because he followed his heart and had a group that followed along with him. Then I think that was it.
So when I read this question, I was like, okay, what parts had I not picked out yet? And some of them you did talk about, as we've already discussed, and so I'm just kind of leaving those out. But one thing that was really interesting, we touched on a little bit, but that I brought up a little bit more, is the fact that with him getting married and the effect that that had on him, and those two friends that set him up at the beginning, I thought it was so funny how at the start they were like, this would never work, kind of thing. And then at the end of it and stuff, you know, they were married, they had kids, they were happy. And I think it had such an effect on me because it's a lot like with my husband and I, because when I first met my husband, it was at my brother's wedding, and the two of us, we had to talk to each other because we were in the wedding party kind of thing. But that was like the only reason we ever really had to talk. And so the beginning of our relationship was more because we had to. But as we went back to school at the same place, and being in Rexburg for that semester, and being able to actually get to know him a little bit more, like off of first impressions, I would have never thought I'd be married to him, especially with all the stories that my brother had told me beforehand, before I even had met him. Like, I didn't think I could ever live with someone like that. And look at me now, you know, I'm married to him. We've been married for about a year, and we're happy. And it seems like it's always those instances in life where you don't think something's going to happen, where is when it does happen. And kind of how we have to be flexible to those types of things, because the Lord's going to lead us when we least expect it to.
That's a good point. That's really cool. That's a neat story. Okay, was there one more question?
There's two more. So the next one is, what was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has it changed? Me personally, with studying family so much throughout starting college and stuff, I feel like I've really always had a good understanding of the family and a really strong understanding of it. But throughout the semester, not necessarily gaining a better understanding of family, but gaining more of an appreciation for family. There's a lot in the world that's fighting against the family that I was aware of, but not necessarily conscious of. And we don't have kids yet, but as we have kids and stuff, how am I going to prepare my kids to be able to fight against that and stuff? And how am I fighting against that is a lot of what kind of came into my head as I thought about this question. And I think that a huge thing is that by having an appreciation for the family and knowing how important the family is really where you are able to fight against it. And so I think I just really gain more of appreciation for my family.
I put the same thing. I said I understood the doctrine. I didn't learn a lot of new doctrine, but it's like studying the scriptures, and like you said, appreciation. You think you understand everything, and then you read it again, and you take a different, you see it in a different aspect or something, or you pick out something that maybe you can improve on in your own life to make you better at the doctrine of the family. And my thing was, I've learned that I'm not really sure why I'm back in school. I'm 50 years old. I don't want a job. I don't want a career. I don't want to work at this. You know what I mean? But throughout the semester, I kept thinking, what is my purpose in this? Why am I supposed to be back at school? And I think maybe it's to help me advocate on, because I advocate on a personal level all the time, but maybe in more of a political arena for me. I'm not quite sure, but maybe that's going to be my purpose in life is to advocate in a more formal venue. So, but yeah, I didn't learn a lot of doctrine, but I learned a lot about myself and a lot of, like you said, appreciation for the family. Okay, the last one is picture your spouse and children, current or future, and write down some thoughts about how they will benefit from you taking this class. Well, my husband learned everything I did because I talked to him about it all the time, so he benefited. The poor guy. He's going to be glad this class is over. But one thing I do for my children who are all over the world is because Family Home Evening is so dear to my heart, and I have such a testimony of Family Home Evening. I send a Family Home Evening lesson out once a month, and I include like a fun handout or a fun object or something, and I love that. And I found myself sending a lot of lessons from this class, and so I thought that was really fun. A couple that I shared was about the title of liberty and Moroni, and then the other one was don't check your religion at the door. And so my kids have been strengthened from this class, as I've learned, and I've always share stuff with them. But then I thought, when a mother is strengthened in the gospel, her family is automatically strengthened as well, because we tend to share everything. So that was kind of my thought on that one.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, we don't have kids yet, but I'm the one that's going to be at home teaching my kids. I'm going to be the one preparing them and stuff. And so I have to be able to understand the principles and the guidelines and stuff and have a good understanding of everything to be able to teach my kids that. And so
Right.
everything that I learn and that I take in is going to reflect in my children. In a different class, in a previous semester, we talked about how children are kind of like our mirrors. And we can look at our children and see, okay, this is what I'm doing good, this is what I'm doing bad, this is what I need to change a lot of the times. And so I think that was something that I picked out a little bit, just with the fact that I don't have children yet, but just with my husband and I, yeah, there's a lot of problems going on and stuff in the world, but how do we communicate those problems? How do we, and related it more to how are we communicating with each other and our problems just within our family. And I think that's helped us communicate better with each other and take time to stop and talk about the issues, because if you don't take time to address them, it's not going to do anything to help with them. And so I think that was something I also kind of took from it, is that, it takes time to do the research and stuff, but it also takes time to talk about issues and to be able to come up with solutions and stuff too, which is technically a part of the research. But according to other things, some people consider it research, some people don't. And it's just that time that it takes to do things. We can't be in a rush to be able to do everything in our lives.
Right. All right, I'm just gonna, come on, I just gotta let my dog out. Sorry.
It's okay.
So yeah, I agree with that. That's a great point too. I think our husbands are just gonna benefit from no matter what we do. Okay, well, I think we accomplished what we needed to.
Okay.
So thanks again for being willing to do it right away in the beginning of the week. I appreciate
No problem.
that.
We're flying out Wednesday, so I'm trying to get everything done.
Oh, good. So this works out with your schedule too. All right. Well, thank you. Good luck with everything.
You too.
All right. Bye.